Picture the day you finally hit the goal. The number on the scale, the number in the bank account, the job title, the relationship. Whatever it was, you got there. You stood on top of it. And somewhere underneath the celebration, quietly, almost embarrassingly, you felt something you weren't supposed to feel. Nothing. Not despair. Not regret. Just nothing. A flatness where the fireworks were supposed to be. And within days, maybe hours, your mind was already reaching for the next target, because standing still on top of the mountain you just climbed felt unbearable. You've been told your whole life that the fix for an unsatisfying life is a clearer goal. Write it down, visualize it, chase it with everything you have, and when you get there, you'll finally exhale. That's the lie. Not because goals are useless, because goals were never built to hold the weight you've been putting on them. A goal is a single point in the distance, and a single point, once reached, disappears. It has no mass. It cannot hold you up. It can only tell you where to walk, and then it vanishes the moment your foot lands on it. There was a philosopher, a 19th century man who spent his entire life obsessed with one question, not, what should you achieve, but, what should you become? He looked at the way people set goals and saw something most people still miss today, that a goal is almost always borrowed. Borrowed from your parents, from the culture, from the version of success other people handed you before you were old enough to ask if it was yours. He didn't want followers who reached targets. He wanted something rarer, people who authored themselves. By the end of this, you're going to understand exactly why the goal you're chasing right now will not fix what you think it will fix, and what to build instead, so that the version of you sitting here in 6 months isn't just closer to a finish line, but is structurally, permanently, a different kind of person. Here's the image to hold on to for the next half hour: a block of stone, and a sculptor standing in front of it. Most people treat their life like they're shopping for a finished statue. They want to walk into the future and find themselves already complete, already disciplined, already successful, already at peace, sitting there waiting to be picked up. That's what a goal secretly promises. Arrive here, and you'll find the finished version of yourself waiting. But that's not how a sculptor works. A sculptor doesn't find the statue. A sculptor becomes the statue's maker, a person who picks up the chisel every single day, whether or not the shape is visible yet. The stone is you. The chisel is your daily behavior, and there is no morning when the sculpting stops and the finished man simply appears. There is only the striking, day after day, and the shape that slowly, almost invisibly, results from it. Delete the goal. Become the sculptor. That's the method. Now let's take it apart piece by piece. 1. Delete the finish line. Most people build their entire motivational structure around a single distant point. Lose the weight, hit the number, get the promotion, and the entire architecture of their self-worth quietly rests on whether that one point is ever reached. Here's what almost nobody warns you about that structure: even when it works, it collapses on contact. Psychologists have a name for the flat, disoriented feeling that follows a major achievement: arrival fatigue, sometimes called the arrival fallacy. You spend years imagining that reaching the goal will change how you feel permanently. It doesn't. It changes how you feel for about a week. Then your nervous system, which was never built to sit still, starts hunting for the next target, because it turns out the goal was never really the thing you wanted. Motion was the thing you wanted. You just didn't know it, so you built a fake finish line to justify moving. The philosopher understood this better than almost anyone in his century. He didn't talk about goals. He talked about self-overcoming the idea that a person worth respecting isn't someone who arrives somewhere and stops, but someone who is permanently in the act of exceeding their previous self. Not a destination, a direction, with no scheduled end. Think about two people starting the exact same year, wanting the exact same outward result, let's say. Both want to build a stronger, more capable body. The first person sets a goal, 20 pounds by summer. She hits it in April. And by May, without a new number to chase, she drifts. The training stops feeling urgent. Within a year, the 20 pounds are back, plus a little more, plus a new layer of shame about failing. a goal she technically already won. The second person never set a number at all. She decided she was becoming someone who trains, not someone chasing a body, but someone who simply does not skip the work. Summer comes and goes. She's stronger than the first woman ever was, and she didn't notice the transition happening, because there was no finish line to cross and then abandon. That's the mechanism. A goal creates a cliff edge motivation on one side, emptiness on the other. Self-overcoming creates a staircase with no top floor, which means there's no cliff to fall off. Ask yourself honestly, is the thing you're chasing right now a staircase or a cliff edge waiting to happen? Because if it's a cliff edge, the next section is where the real damage is happening, and it starts before you've even failed or succeeded. It starts with where the goal came from in the first place. 2. Stop chasing borrowed peaks. Here's an uncomfortable question. That goal sitting in your notes app right now, the income target, the body, the relationship milestone, the follower count, did you choose it, or did you inherit it? Most people never actually ask this. They assume their goals are self-generated because the desire feels personal, feels urgent, feels like theirs. But desire is one of the easiest things in the world to manufacture in someone else. Every advertisement, every comparison scroll, every offhand comment from a parent about what a real career looks like, all of it quietly installs targets in you that you then experience as your own ambition. The philosopher called this herd thinking, the tendency of people to adopt values wholesale from the group around them, then defend those values as if they'd arrived at them independently. He wasn't gentle about it. He thought most people spend their entire lives climbing a mountain someone else pointed at, and mistake the exhaustion of the climb for evidence that the mountain must matter. Picture a young man who grows up watching everyone around him chase the same visible markers: a title, a car, a wedding by a certain age. He hits every single one of them, on schedule, and still lies awake at 34 wondering why none of it feels like his life. Now picture a second man, same neighborhood, same starting resources, who at 25 asked himself one dangerous question: if nobody was watching, if no one would ever know, would I still want this? He crossed out half his list. What was left wasn't impressive to anyone else. But it was his, and a decade later, he's the only one of the two who isn't quietly resentful of the life he built. This is the part most people skip, because it's harder than setting a goal. Before you chase anything, you have to interrogate who handed it to you. Not to reject ambition, to make sure the ambition is actually load-bearing, actually yours, strong enough to survive the moment nobody's applauding. Which raises the obvious question you should be sitting with right now: how much of what you're working toward would survive if no one ever found out you achieved it? Once you've stripped away the borrowed peaks, you're left with a smaller, stranger problem. Because even a goal that's genuinely yours is still, structurally, a goal, and goals have a design flaw that has nothing to do with where they came from. 3. Trade the target for an identity. Here's the design flaw. A goal describes an outcome. An identity describes a person. And outcomes are fragile. They depend on circumstances, timing, other people, luck, while identity is portable. It survives a bad month. It survives a bad year. It doesn't require permission from reality to keep functioning. I want to save $50,000 is an outcome. It can be wiped out by one emergency, one layoff, one market downturn, and the second it's wiped out, the goal is gone, and so is the motivation that was built entirely around it. I am someone who does not spend carelessly is an identity. Wipe out the $50,000, and the identity is still standing, fully intact, ready to rebuild the number from scratch without missing a step. The philosopher's most repeated instruction, across almost everything he wrote, comes down to 3 words: become who you are. Not become who you want to be someday. Become present tense, ongoing, an action with no completion date, who you are, meaning the fullest, most self-authored version of the material you're already made of. Notice what's missing from that instruction. There's no target number in it. There's no deadline. It's not aimed at a future event. It's aimed at a mode of operating that you either are living out today, or you aren't. Most people build a life around answering the question, what do I want to have? The sculptor's method answers a different question entirely. What do I want to be the kind of person who does? 2 people can want the same external results, say, financial independence, and build completely different lives depending on which question they actually organize their behavior around. The first, chasing the number, will do whatever produces the number fastest, including things that erode the person doing them. The second, chasing the identity of someone disciplined and unshakable with money, will end up with the number anyway, as a byproduct, and keep it, because the person who produced it is still standing after the goal itself stops mattering. Rewrite your current goal as a sentence that has no finish line in it. Not "I want to write a book." Try, "I am someone who writes daily," regardless of whether it's good yet. Notice the sentence doesn't get easier to break, it gets harder to abandon, because abandoning it means abandoning a description of yourself, not just missing a target on a calendar. This is where most people quietly balk, because an identity has to be tested constantly, in real time, not proven once and filed away. Which brings us to the test the philosopher actually designed for exactly this problem. 4. Run the eternal recurrence test. Here's a thought experiment the philosopher proposed, and it's stranger and more useful than almost anything modern productivity culture has come up with since. Imagine a demon appears to you and tells you this: the life you are living right now, every joy, every boredom, every small humiliation, every quiet victory, you will live it again, not once more, infinitely, exactly as it is, in the exact same order, forever, on an endless loop. Would you fall to your knees in despair? Or would you, somehow, want nothing more badly than this to have this moment confirmed and reconfirmed, eternally? This isn't a comfortable exercise, and it wasn't meant to be. It was built as a diagnostic tool. Most people organize their lives around a future payoff. "I'll be happy when I get there," which means they've quietly agreed to treat today as disposable, a means to some other day's end. The eternal recurrence test destroys that trick instantly, because if this exact day is going to repeat forever, there is no later to offload the meaning onto. Today has to be able to justify itself, on its own terms, right now, or the whole structure of your life is standing on sand. Think about two employees leaving the same underwhelming job on the same evening. The first tells himself, "I'm just putting in time until the promotion, until the savings hit a certain number, until the real life starts." He can tolerate almost anything, because he's mentally living in a future version of the story. The second asks the harder question: if I had to live today, exactly as it happened, on an infinite loop, is that acceptable? And because the answer is no, he doesn't wait for permission from some future milestone. He changes something now, this week, because later was never going to arrive. It was always going to be another today, indistinguishable from this one, unless something actually moves. This is not a call to be reckless or impulsive. It's a call to stop financing your happiness on credit, borrowed from a future self who, statistically, tends to have the exact same problems you currently do, just older. Run the test honestly on your current week. If this week repeated forever, is that a life or a waiting room? Sit with that for a second, because the next principle is what you actually do with the answer once you can't lie to yourself about it anymore. 5. Love what the day demands. Say the test comes back uncomfortable. Say your current week, run on an infinite loop, is closer to a waiting room than a life. The instinct most people have here is to escape, quit the job today, blow up the relationship, chase a dramatic reset that will supposedly deliver the real life once the obstacle is cleared. The philosopher had a phrase for the opposite move, and it's one of the most misunderstood ideas in his entire body of work: amor fati, love of fate. Not passive resignation, the opposite of it. It means taking whatever is actually in front of you, including the parts you didn't choose and don't like, and metabolizing it as necessary material rather than an obstacle standing between you and your real life. The boring job, the difficult parent, the body that doesn't cooperate the way you want it to, amor fati, doesn't ask you to pretend these are good. It asks you to stop treating them as interruptions to your becoming, and start treating them as the actual stone the sculptor has been handed to work with. Here's why this matters more than it sounds like it should. Most people waiting for ideal conditions before they start becoming who they claim they want to be will wait forever, because ideal conditions are a myth manufactured by the same part of the brain that manufactured the original goal in the first place. There is always a reason it's not quite the right moment. The stone is never pre-polished. It arrives rough, oddly shaped, full of grain lines running in inconvenient directions, and the sculptor doesn't get a different, easier block. He gets that one, and either he learns to work with the grain, or he never produces anything at all. Consider two people laid off from the same collapsing company on the same afternoon. One spends the next 6 months resenting the company, the economy, the unfairness of the timing, waiting for conditions to improve before doing anything meaningful. The other treats the layoff itself as the new material, not the good version of events, just the actual version, and starts building the next chapter out of exactly the rubble that's in front of him this week, not the rubble he wishes he had instead. A year later, the second person is unrecognizable. The first is still, essentially, waiting for an apology from circumstances that were never going to give him one. This isn't positivity, it's closer to the opposite of flat, undramatic acceptance that whatever is in front of you right now is the only material you will ever actually get to work with, so you may as well pick up the chisel. Loving the day in front of you is one thing when the day is hard. It's an entirely different discipline when the day is simply repetitive, and repetition is where almost everyone quietly gives up. 6. Build rituals, not milestones. Milestones live far away, on a calendar, waiting to be reached. Rituals live today, and they don't care whether today feels significant. This distinction is the entire difference between someone who transforms over a decade and someone who plans to transform and never quite starts. A milestone asks, "Are we there yet?" Every single day that the answer is no, the milestone quietly punishes you with the feeling of falling short. A ritual asks something completely different. Did I do the thing today? And the ritual doesn't require the thing to be impressive, doesn't require visible progress, doesn't require anyone else to notice. It only requires repetition. This is where most people's plans actually die, not from lack of ambition, but from designing a structure that depends on distant proof of progress to stay motivated. Motivation that depends on visible proof is motivation that runs out exactly when you need it most, which is during the long, undramatic middle where nothing looks different yet from the outside. Picture two writers who both want to finish a book. The first sets a milestone, finished draft by December. Every week she doesn't feel closer to December, she feels worse, and by March she's abandoned the project entirely, because the milestone kept reminding her how far away she still was. The second writer never mentions December. She has one ritual, 500 words, every morning, before checking her phone. Some days it's brilliant. Most days it's mediocre, and she deletes half of it the next morning. But she never misses the ritual, because the ritual was never graded on quality, only on whether it happened. December arrives. The first writer has a folder of guilt. The second has a finished, imperfect, real manuscript, because she was never trying to arrive anywhere. She was just refusing to skip the chisel. The philosopher lived this almost literally long daily walks, the same disciplined hours of work, the same unglamorous repetition, year after year, producing a body of work that no single burst of motivated inspiration could have produced on its own. Discipline, to him, wasn't the opposite of freedom. It was the precondition for it, the scaffolding that let a fragile, inconsistent human being behave like a consistent one, often enough for something real to accumulate. Ask yourself what your current ritual actually is, not your goal, your ritual. If you can't name one, that's not a discipline problem. That's the reason the goal has been circling for months without landing anywhere. Once the rituals are in place, one more trap is still waiting, and it's the one that quietly poisons even people who are doing everything else right. 7. Kill the comparison reflex. Goals almost always come with an invisible scoreboard, because a goal is usually defined in relation to other people, whether you admit it or not. Faster than them, richer than them, more followers than them. Even goals that sound personal get in shape, build a business, get measured, eventually, against someone else's version of the same thing, usually someone you're quietly comparing yourself to on a screen. This is one of the most corrosive parts of goal culture, and almost nobody names it directly. The moment your progress is defined relative to someone else's, your sense of success stops being something you control. It becomes hostage to a stranger's trajectory, their luck, their starting resources, their timeline, none of which you have any authority over. You can do everything right and still feel like you're losing, purely because someone else's stone happened to be softer, or their starting block happened to already be shaped like a statue. The philosopher's answer to this wasn't to suppress ambition. It was to redefine what winning even means. He talked about something he called the will to power, not power over other people, despite how the phrase gets misused, but the internal drive toward increased capacity, mastery, and self-command. Under that definition, the only meaningful comparison is between the you of today and the you of 6 months ago. Everyone else's stone is irrelevant, because you were never handed their stone. You were handed yours. Think of two athletes training in the same gym. One measures every session against the strongest person in the room, and walks out demoralized 9 days out of 10, because there will almost always be someone further along. The other measures every session against her own last session, a little more weight, a little more control, a little more discipline than last week. A year later, the first athlete has quit twice and restarted twice, worn down by a scoreboard she never had access to change. The second is simply, undramatically, stronger than she used to be, because her metric was the only one she ever actually had jurisdiction over. Cut the scoreboard. Not because other people's progress doesn't exist, but because it was never actually data about you. And once the scoreboard is gone, once the milestones are gone, once even the identity is running quietly in the background instead of being announced, you arrive at the actual philosophy underneath everything we've covered so far. 8. Become who you are. Here's the whole method, compressed into the phrase the philosopher used most and explained least, because he didn't think it needed explaining to anyone willing to actually live it. Become who you are, not who you'll be once the goal lands. Not who you were before life talked you out of it. Who you are right now, underneath the borrowed peaks and the scoreboard and the finish lines waiting to be chiseled into visibility by nothing except the accumulation of what you actually do, day after day, whether or not anyone is watching. This is why the sculptor never puts the chisel down. Not because the statue is never good enough, because the statue was never the point. The becoming was the point. A finished statue is a dead thing, static, unable to grow, unable to respond to anything new. A sculptor mid-work is alive, still capable of surprise, still capable of discovering a shape in the stone that wasn't visible from the first angle. The moment you convince yourself you've arrived, that the goal is finally hit, the person is finally built, the becoming is finally finished, you've traded a living process for a dead outcome. And dead outcomes, no matter how impressive, stop growing the instant you stop striking the stone. Two people, one final time. Both spend a decade working towards something significant. The first organizes the entire decade around a single distant summit, reaches it in year 9, and spends year 10 quietly lost, because the only structure his life ever had was aimed at a point that no longer exists in his future. The second never had a summit at all, only a direction, and a daily discipline pointed at it, and an identity that didn't require the direction to ever technically end. At the end of year 10, an outside observer might not even be able to point to the exact day either of them succeeded. But only one of them is still standing at the stone with the chisel in his hand, unbothered by the absence of a finish line, because he never built his life to need one. That's the deletion. Not motivation. Motivation was never really the problem, and it was never going to survive contact with a life this long anyway. What you're deleting is the architecture of arrival itself, the idea that somewhere out there is a day when the becoming stops and the having begins. There is no such day. There is only the stone and the chisel, and whether you show up to it today, regardless of what yesterday's swing accomplished or failed to accomplish. So here's what you actually walk away with. Delete the finish line, because it was always going to leave you empty on arrival. Check whether the peak you're climbing was ever really yours, or something the herd handed you before you knew to ask. Trade the target for an identity that survives bad luck. Run the recurrence test on your current week, honestly, and stop financing meaning on a future self who may never arrive to collect it. Love the actual material in front of you instead of waiting for a better block of stone. Replace the milestone with a ritual that doesn't require anyone's applause to keep functioning. Cut the scoreboard that was never really measuring you in the first place. And underneath all of it, stop trying to arrive and start trying to become, because arrival was always a story goals told you to keep you compliant, and becoming was the only part of it that was ever actually real. Most people will hear this and go set another goal by tomorrow morning. A few will put the list away for good, pick up the chisel, and simply not stop. Decide, quietly, which one you're going to be and then don't announce it. Just start striking the stone.